The 9/8 circle of hell is where the strongest of demons gather. Flaming flames, scorching soil, and a sky shimmering with scarlet. The demons of the 9,000 round hell fought endless battles here. These battles were not for the title of strongest. For over the past 10,000 years, he had long since made his mind up. And the hell, split before that, had become one under his rule. And the reason for the unity of all demons. A place formerly ruled by 7 great demons, then united by one ruler, the Great King. A dark-haired young man sat on a throne woven from the white bones of the 7 great demons. He sat in the throne with his eyes quietly closed. And even so, there was an incredible energy emanating from him, capable of knocking his breath away. In front of him, kneeling on one knee, sat in a row of demons of many thousands, shuddering at the power emanating from the young man. One of the demons in the row slowly began to make its way toward the Great King. The carcass was 5 meters in size, covered entirely in scarlet hair. It was carved solid and hard, with a horn on its forehead. Molars protruded from his mouth, and great bat-like wings protruded from behind his back. The typical representative of an unclean force bowed on one knee before the king. "O King, Palak once said that no one but him could rule the 9,000 circle of hell." He now knelt before the young man in horror. If you look closely at his extraordinary appearance, it's clear that everyone would be frightened of Palak's appearance. However, all of the demons here understood the fear of the Great One, Overlord. 10,000 years ago, a man endowed with the power of the Devourer descended into hell. This man immediately began to exterminate the demons one by one. So, he started with the first 1,000 round of hell and made it to the 9,000th round. As he devoured the demons, he grew stronger and stronger, eventually becoming the most powerful overlord ever. Thousands, no, tens of thousands of demons were consumed by his devourer power, and even the 7 supreme demons with such power that they couldn't defeat each other, fell to their knees before him. The reason all the demons were united was the terrible monster devouring them one by one. Even Palak, who knew nothing of fear, couldn't help but shudder in horror. "Why would you come back? Don't you have everything in hell?" mumbled Palak with fear, barely able to open his mouth. The young man's closed eyes widened slightly and more energy began to emanate from him. "Have I? Have what?" Palak was silent. The face of the young king, seated on the throne, twisted, and he spoke. "There must be something to have. Tell me, what have we got?" There was a sense of injustice in his voice, which turned smoothly into anger. "There's no food here, no entertainment. What is there in this damn place that I could have? A wasteland, a bloody sky, and unquenchable tongues of flame. There is nothing on the 9,000 round hell." Hearing this, Palak's eyes widened. "Are you hungry, then? I have something very special in mind for you. Guys, bring it in." We obey. The demons, following the order, brought out a giant plate. On it, smeared with dark, almost black blood, lay the head of a demon. "He is the last of their kind. Your Grace, though it is a humble gift, it is an expression of our devotion. Please do not refuse it," said Palak. Without exaggeration, the sight presented to Gang Yu looked disgusting, which caused his face to twist, and he blurted out, "You fools, this is not what I want." He threw the plate to the ground, and it shattered with a crash. With clenched hands and fists, he stepped forward. "I don't want to eat this disgusting-looking, tasteless food. I. His clenched fists trembled. His indignation consumed him so much that his voice began to crack. "Kimchig. I want kimchig. Kimchichij. This is my true desire. A food filled with blood and meat." "No, dumbass, that's not it." Kangwoo clenched his fists even harder and shouted. "This is indeed a red meat dish, but not at all what the demons imagined." Palak looked at Gang Yu with eyes full of devotion. "From whose head is it supposed to be made? Or perhaps from whose entrails? You just tell me, and I will prepare it, however difficult it may be." "Kimchichij is something else," said Kangwoo, in a pitiful voice. For the demons, eating was nothing but devouring the victorious loser. "And, you said you lacked entertainment." "That's true, you've already killed all the strongest. As you'd expect from the Overlord. Lord of bloodshed and carnage. I want to read a manhwa or a novel." Palak, annoyed, struck the ground with his fist as hard as he could. Under such pressure, a hole was formed in the ground. "I am so weak that I cannot please you. Please kill me. Listen to me, please." Kangwoo returned to his throne in despair. "I need at least a woman. Yes, at least a woman, a woman. We have Lilith. Lilith, the succubus queen. The first beauty of hell." One of the demons lined up stepped forward and inquired. "Lilith's heart won't be enough." Her voice was strange enough, and her many tentacles were already encircling the young master's arms. Her face, with its 18 eyes, overrode everything. The king was silent. 18 eyes. Moving on their own, dozens of tentacles. A tongue that resembled a snake. They called her an incredible beauty. But the sight of such beauty gave Kangwoo a headache, and he put his hand to his forehead. Succubus. Why exactly a succubus? She didn't look like what he had imagined. After all, a succubus who feeds on other people's sexual energy should be beautiful at the very least. And she looked even worse than Pollock himself. And she wasn't the only one. All of hell's succubi looked like that. I'm coming to His Majesty's bedroom tonight. No, don't come. Oh, you should be embarrassed. You can't do that because you're the king of the 9,000 circle of hell. Just don't come. Oh, that's sweet. You don't have to be so modest. I'll be by your side all my life. Please disappear. Gangyu tilted his head down and covered his face with his hands. He is not the kind of person who only looks at appearances in love. On the contrary, he sincerely believed that once he fell in love, appearances did not matter much. However, not to that extent. The problem was not that she was ugly. She didn't fit human aesthetic standards in any way. No way. Back to Earth, thought Kangwoo decisively. We have to go back to Earth. Despite his servants' desperate attempts to persuade him to stay, the decision was unwavering. Not even that, on the contrary, their persuasion gave him confidence. I'm going back. A few days before, he had finished off the last mighty demon which completed his preparations. Finally, it was time to be compensated for 10,000 years of torment. Brace yourselves. Your Majesty. Pollock, catching sight of the sovereign's steadfastness, lowered his head meekly. It is His Highness' choice. Pollock swore allegiance, but there was nothing he could do but follow the king's wishes. Pollock, do I have to say it again? I'm sorry. Pollock nodded courteously and went to his servants to gather the necessary items. The weapons of the 7 great demons, which they had fought in their lifetime, were what needed to be prepared. Rumor has it that the power contained within these weapons is so great that it can form a rift in space and time. Recently, after consuming the last of the strongest, Gangyu acquired the final weapon. And now all of them, prepared, lay before him. The preparations were complete. Good, the young man rose from his throne and leisurely walked toward the 7 trophies, of different colors and shapes. There were 7 of them, and they encapsulated the power of the entire 9,000 circle of hell. Their power attracted, and their appearance perfectly complemented each other. If you put all the energy that the king absorbed into them, you could really open a time portal. Har! Kangwoo sighed softly. He had been looking forward to returning to Earth so much that he seemed to have lost his sense of reality. Finally, the return. The unfathomable energy from Gangwoo's body began to flow into the weapon. The power of the Devourer, growing in tens, hundreds, thousands of years. One could say without exaggeration that even the 9,000 circle itself had already been consumed by the king. So great was this power. Man Jung. This is the word that describes the part inside Kangwoo that contains the clot of great power. And now, the pounding Man Jung perfectly complemented the weapons of the 7 great demons. A moment and a rift formed in space and a black passageway appeared before his eyes. I can finally return to Earth. The same second the vivid remnants of his memories of Earth surfaced in his mind. Even after 10,000 years, he hadn't forgotten his hometown. But there was no family waiting for him in that place, no devoted girl. But, even if my city is small, it's better than being here, in a place with no food or entertainment. He was willing to do anything to get out of this place of bloodshed and murder. Okay, we need to set the time. Kangwoo had no desire to move at the present time. After all, the face of the earth could have changed enormously in 10,000 years. So much so that the Kimchichij might not even be there anymore. A place without Kimchichij was an earth that was impossible to imagine. His body was covered in goosebumps. Kangwoo decided to go back to the time when he first went to hell. Well, I went. King. Pollock bowed his head dejectedly, for the Lord's will was unwavering. From all 18 of Lilith's eyes came tears, something resembling chicken droppings. She began to speak. Are you really going to leave me? Don't cry. It looks awful. So awful that perhaps one day her sobbing image will appear in one of those horror movies. She probably misunderstood the master's words, but her tentacles trembled slightly and she screamed, "Oh, what kind words? My heart seems to be bursting with your love." And when she said this, one of the tentacles next to her heart did indeed burst and pus gushed out of it. Oh dear. My king? My love. Stay away. Lilith wants to go with the king, too. Disappear. Looking at the approaching and pus-bleeding Lilith, Kangwoo hurriedly and without a single doubt rushed into the portal that opened. My lord. Whatever happens, Lilith will come for you. The screaming faded and an unusual feeling enveloped his consciousness. May our paths never cross. He gave Lilith the middle finger. No, not just to her, but to all the torment he had gone through in those 10,000 years. And it's not that easy, thought Kang-woo, trying to control time travel. Time controls life, so it's not that simple at all. Kang-woo adjusted time as closely as possible to when he first got to hell. A margin of error of 10 to 20 years is not that important. After all, he was born an orphan, so he has nothing in his past to change, and he has no hopes for a brighter future. The main thing is to get him to that earth, the memory of which is deposited deep in his memory. The time settings were set, and some force began to pull him deep into the tunnel. Unable to resist, he quietly closed his eyes and relied on the force that was pulling him in. Kernel access error. Protection system is activated. Error. Your power is too great. All forces are focused on protecting the kernel. System is in reboot mode. Error. Your power is too great. Fault cannot be repaired. Defect cannot be repaired. Begin packing it up. Error. Your power is too great. Defect cannot be repaired. Defect cannot be repaired. Begin packing it up. What's that sound? A completely unnatural voice, heard from everywhere, made Kang-woo cringe. However, the thoughts were not destined to come together. His consciousness, like everything else around him, clouded over. An intense pain pierced his body, such that he could hardly move his fingers. Gathering his strength, Kang-woo, groaning in pain, opened his eyes. Where am I? The first thing that caught his eye was the dense forest. The sun's rays were breaking through the dense foliage of the trees, lightly tickling the young man's cheeks. Phew, Kang-woo took a deep breath and forced himself to pull himself up. A sharp pain spreading through his body hit him in the head. Okay, first we need to do some diagnostics. We should make sure that nothing irreparable has happened to the body. Status information is downloading. What? As soon as he thought about the body check, a blue panel appeared before his eyes. He rounded his eyes in surprise, and a little wrinkle appeared on his forehead, before he turned to the status window. Status window, player name, Kang-woo level 1, stage 1, awakening, level 1 feature, Eater's power, rank. Special skills are sealed. Skills, none power, 8 vitality, 9 physical abilities, 7 charms, 0 magicians, 12 intelligence, 8 wisdom, 7 what the hell is that? His state board looked exactly the same as it did before he was sent to hell. Kang-woo's face twisted. He couldn't understand why this was happening. You say the powers of all those monsters I devoured are sealed. Power Eater. The unique power that allowed him to survive hell. The power that allowed him to become the strongest overlord ever. And now he is informed that his Manhwa, his power and all his abilities are sealed. Panic came over him, horror at the fact that the power he had been accumulating for 10,000 years was no longer within his control. Kang-woo took a deep breath and tried to calm down. Panic and rejection of reality would only make things worse. He was well aware of that. Concentrate, he said, first needing to become aware of his condition. Kang-woo tried to summon Manhwa, the power he had been saving up for tens, hundreds, thousands of years, devouring demons. I can't feel it, or rather, through skillful concentration, he was able to sense Manhwa, but it was so paltry that the young man didn't give it much thought. Now he would match her not with infinity, but rather with a speck of dust. If it goes like this, it will be quite difficult to use any power at all. Kang-woo was obviously annoyed. After all, among demons, he was considered the most powerful, thanks to the Devourer power. Thanks to it, he could also devour those who also had special powers. There were 666 such special demons that were eaten. Among them were 7 great demons, which, after devouring them, he learned how to use their powers. Each of the powers is unique, but to use them, you need to have a certain amount of your energy. Right now, the energy he had was not enough to use the force, but rather the inability to use it. The blade will also be difficult to use in the present situation. The power Shabnak had previously possessed was called the power of the blade. It was a power that, when activated, a sword would emerge from the body. It's not that good, having enough energy and the blade can be skillfully used, but at the moment it was almost impossible. Kang-woo concentrated on his left hand and summoned the power of the blade. A moment later, a sharp black blade extended from the back of his hand. The young man felt the energy transfer from his body to the sword. This is going to be hard to get used to. The power, formerly approaching infinity, granting limitless possibilities, was now like a puddle of water at the bottom of a dried-up ocean. The realization of this fact was depressing. The window of state displayed reality. For what reason the force was sealed up remained a mystery, but it was quite clear that Man Jung was almost at zero. What an injustice. The moment of the sudden appearance of the state window in front of my eyes and the characteristics displayed on it flashed through my mind. Did I really get into the game? Kang Woo suddenly wondered if he was on Earth. Kick, kick, he heard an unpleasant clang of metal and turned toward him. He tensed as he realized where the sound was coming from. Low, chest-high young men, with skin and sharp teeth of a pale green hue. They resembled the vile creatures of the first 1,000 circle of hell. As far as Kang Woo knew, such creatures had never been found on Earth. This isn't Earth, is it? He muttered in a tone full of despair. Kang Woo couldn't even laugh at the fact that after 10,000 years of preparation, he wasn't on Earth. Kiar, a huge crowd of nasty-looking monsters yelled and rushed towards him. What went wrong? The open passageway was definitely leading to Earth, and the feelings were exactly the same as they had been 10,000 years ago on the way to hell. The puzzle did not add up. Kang Woo's despair was overwhelming. Ki-yar-yar-yar, the monsters yelled even harder and rushed towards Kang Woo, pointing their crooked swords at him. Moments later, the monster's hands that had been severed by Kang Woo's black dagger fell to the ground. After wounding his opponents and crouching on the ground after the attack, he looked over his sword. Even though almost all of Man Jung was sealed, he was still the great overlord of the 9,000 circle of hell. All the more reason to have no problem if the opponent is so insignificant. I'll deal with these guys first. He had no time to think as he battled the monsters screaming wildly and attacking from all sides. Kang Woo's gaze was as calm as ever. He looked around at the monsters. Anger, similar to the aggression of predators, began to rise within the young man. His anger was also felt by the monsters. Their paws began to swing. There seemed to be 8 of them. If Man Jung had been available, he wouldn't have had to move either. He would have put them down thanks to the force. Now, however, it was different. How unaccustomed to moving again, he pushed off the ground with his foot, instantly repelling the monster's attack. Then he severed their heads. The experience gained through thousands of years of countless wars helped turn the crowd of monsters into a pile of cold corpses. Ding! Level E goblin successfully killed. Experience points increased. Level increased by 3. Level up. After finishing off the monsters that had attacked him, the goblins to be exact, the state window popped up in front of him again. Kang Woo saw that his level had indeed risen by 3 points. And his energy had gone up 1. And it wasn't just an increase in numbers, Kang Woo felt his body become stronger. It didn't matter now, the increase in level, the increase in energy, none of that mattered at all now. It is necessary to find out whether or not this place is Earth. At the very least, whether people live here. It would be a lot easier with the powers of the Elector. He smiled involuntarily when he remembered the power that allowed him to fly. This power allowed him to ignore even the law of gravity, but as it turned out, it required far more strength than Kang Woo had. Right now he had the strength to fly as high as a leap. Kang Woo, realizing the situation, was ready to fall dead after the goblins. We need to gather more information. He now needed to know about this obscure place. Kang Woo stretched his hand toward the dead goblin bodies and barely opened his mouth, devouring. The power of a devourer. The unique power that made him the ruler of the 9,000 circle of hell had awakened. The dark power emanating from the young man's hands completely enveloped the dead goblin bodies. Ara! Ara! The dark haze absorbing the energy of the bodies dissipated as the eerie voice subsided. Gradually, Kang Woo began to learn information about goblins. A devourer's power does not allow him to read minds. At most what it allows him to learn is information about the body's owner. He learned the goblin's body features, their habits, lifestyles, and weaknesses. But the information he longed to know, the information about this place, was not there. Damn it, was the moment a distraught Kang Woo allowed himself to swear. Among the energy he absorbed was an unusually familiar power. A faint particle of this energy might not have been grasped, but it was impossible to fool his senses. Kang Woo's eyes glowed. Magi. The goblins' bodies contained, albeit small, amounts of Magi. Zing! Magi level increased by 1 unit. The moment Kang Woo first thought about Magi, a notification window appeared. At the same time, he felt a small amount of power fill his body. Damn it, though the strength increased, the young man cursed once more. Magi is a power endowed by the creatures of hell. That meant that if this place were Earth, there would be no Magi here. The likelihood that it wasn't Earth increased. No, anxiety appeared on his face. The reason he wished he was the strongest in hell was the hope of one day returning to Earth. Endless carnage. In his mind, that long period of time when all he did was fight surfaced. After all, no one in hell is interested in anything but defeating the enemy. There could be no such thing. In the battle with the great demons, each time he gained victory, Kangwoo was at first discouraged. He was torn from his thoughts by a sound, ki-yar-yar-yar. It was a cry coming from somewhere far away. The young man's face cleared again. It was not the voice of a monster or a demon. He felt it intuitively. It was definitely a human scream. Also, a girl. Kangwoo's body trembled. A shudder spread throughout his body. It seemed that the cry coming to his ears helped him perk up. Girl. If anyone had heard him, they would have called him a pervert for crying out like that. But now he did not care what anyone thought of him. For about 10,000 years. For 10,000 years he had not even seen images of girls. On the contrary, it would be strange to keep his composure. Kangwoo confidently took a step, then a second step, and headed in the direction from where the scream was heard. The power of acceleration. This was the power that the demon Valafar used when he was alive, and then it was passed on to Kangwoo. The black magi emanating from his body enveloped the young man's legs. Then it began to dissipate little by little, and Kangwoo was rushing like an arrow. It was an incredible speed by human standards, but for him, such speed was a burden. And yet McGee must be enough. If Man Marjung had been available to him, he would have been in the right place in a second. He felt how frustrated he was at the realization that there was no way to use the power to its fullest potential. Ki-yar-yar-yar. The screams were becoming more and more distinct. However, they mingled with the sounds made not so long ago by the goblins who had attacked Kangwoo. Just so long as she doesn't look like Lilith. It's okay if she turns out to be older or full. As long as she has 2 eyes, 1 nose, and a mouth, that's enough. And no tentacles. Though the boy wondered, though he imagined Lilith's ugly tentacles, he was focused on McGee, concentrated now at his feet. He, for the first time in a long time, felt his breathing begin to hitch. It wasn't even a fight to the death. The young man was merely trying to run faster, and it was forcing him to pant. Found it, he said, climbing out of the dense forest, and the wasteland spread out before him. And there about a dozen goblins surrounded the girl, making her scream in terror. She sat there, clutching her bloody and obviously wounded legs tightly. Kangwoo involuntarily exclaimed. His body trembled at the sight of how these things surrounded the girl. The black hair reaching almost to her waist, the unusual cut of her eyes, chubby lips, a towering nose, and a small spot to the left of her mouth. She was so beautiful that if she had passed by on the street, Kangwoo would have lowered his head in embarrassment. But now her beauty was not important at all. Now her extraordinary beauty seemed a completely insignificant problem. Human, it was a human being. 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, it was a person. Not festering tentacles, not wings like a bat. Not a monster covered in blood. No. This is an ordinary human being. Oh, great one, he couldn't take it anymore. Kangwoo became so ecstatic that, for the first time in 10,000 years of hell, he wanted to turn to the Lord again. Gee. Ouch. The girl, looking at the scruffy goblin swords running around her, clutched her eyes in horror. Seeing a sword pointed in her direction, the girl must have been arriving in a state of expectation, waiting to die. At that moment, ki-yar-yar-yar. The goblins, surprised, shouted. Kangwoo broke their circle and with quick movements, as if he were a predator, began to exterminate the goblins one by one. The eyes of the girl who had fallen to the ground were rounded. She looked at Kangwoo with a look of disbelief, at the guy who had brutally slaughtered a herd of over 10 goblins in just a few seconds. Kayak. The last goblin's head fell thanks to the sharp blade of the black blade. Spinning the blade that had taken the goblin's lives in his hands, the young man headed towards the girl sitting on the ground. Thank you, she stood up, despite her injured legs, and nodded her thanks. The girl staggered slightly and Kangwoo took her by the arms and helped her to come to her senses. As he took her hands, an electric shock ran through her body. He would never have felt so good in hell. A man. Yes, this was a man he missed madly, a man he craved to meet. The sensations he was receiving now stirred his consciousness. He had endured 10,000 years, all these feelings, repressed for so long, were released. These feelings overrode everything else, completely occupying his mind. My name is Hansil. Thank you for saving my life. She looked at the man holding her, but she didn't try to free herself, just nodded once more in thanks. Kangwoo looked at her and proposed sincerely, let's get married. What? It would be great if we had 3 children. What? What do you mean? Hansil looked at Kangwoo in embarrassment. Suddenly receiving the offer, she didn't know whether she should get angry or thank the guy. I'm sorry, common sense returned to Kang-woo, and he shook his head and let go of the girl's hands. Get it together. This was the man he had been longing to meet. You can't look crazy from the start. My name is Oh Kang-yu. You said your name was Han-sil? How's the wound, does it hurt a lot? Yes, that's right. The wound is not that bad, but suddenly the pain of the wound caused her to cry out, and she fell over. Ouch. As she hit the ground, some rectangular object fell out of her pocket. Smartphone, the guy's eyes glazed over as he saw the object fall out. He was sure it was a smartphone, a thing of which he still had vague memories. It seems, this is Earth, after all. Yes, and the name written on the phone is her name. It's Korean. Han-sil. More than that. We do talk, not in the devil's language, as it was in hell, but in Korean, as it was 10,000 years ago. Being able to communicate is proof that this is Earth, and she is obviously Korean. Good thing I practiced even there, so that I wouldn't forget the Korean language in hell over time. Kang-woo forbade his servants to use the devil's language and taught them the basics of the Korean language. Are you alright? Kang-woo tore his clothes and pulled the cloth over the girl's leg. It wasn't just any clothes, it was an outfit made from fabric scarcely found in hell. Yes, thank you. She tightened the bandage, and a blush broke out on her cheeks, though the girl regarded such kindness with suspicion. She was visibly stunned and at the same time highly wary of both the proposal of marriage and the phrase about children. Thank you for your concern. She would be dead by now if not for Kang-woo. And if she had been captured, something worse could have happened. They say monsters feel attraction toward humans, too, so thanks to him, Han-sil can live her life in peace. The girl felt remorse for treating the young man with apprehension. Be grateful, Han-sil smiled and nodded once more. Even though she had only recently become a player, she had heard about the gaming world quite often. For the sake of profit, players would organize a party and then betray their comrades in cold blood in order to survive. Of course, not everyone does this, but players like Kang-woo, ready to swoop in upon hearing screams, are a huge rarity. Take it easy and sit down. I will. The young man looked at Han-sil's smile and smiled faintly, too. Good, gaining her trust was important. No, it was necessary. Kang-woo wanted her to stay by his side. And not just because she was the first person he had met since returning from hell. She possessed information that was important to him. What the hell are these monsters doing on Earth? The difference between the Earth he knew and the one he found himself on was enormous. And the girl sitting in front of him was the perfect way to find out what had happened to Earth. That's the main task right now. Kang-woo motioned toward the phone that had fallen out. Taking the smartphone in his hands, he immediately pressed the home button. So he recognized one of the things he was interested in. It immediately popped up on the lock screen. 05/22/2023 3:34 p.m. The year 2023. He certainly went to hell in 2018. It turns out he got to the near future, just 5 years into the future. I didn't screw up the timing, on the contrary, he was counting on a big margin of error, so 10 to 20 years ahead. One might consider the time travel a success, because the error was much smaller than expected. But in just 5 years, the Earth had changed too much. Are you saying that in 5 years there are monsters on Earth? Kang-woo didn't understand what could have happened to the Earth in just 5 years that monsters began to quietly walk through the forest. This information is not enough. The information was clearly not enough to understand the situation here and now. The boy turned toward Han-sil. I think this is your phone. Yes, thank you. May I ask what you're doing here? Han-sil continued to answer more languidly. For some reason I had to hunt alone. Har. I'm quite new, but I decided to go through the gate to the E level. Stupid thing to do. It was clear from her voice that she wasn't pleased with herself. Kang-woo's eyes sparkled. Gate, player, it turns out they're not on Earth now, but one of the levels. And the fact that she's a new player, Kang-woo thought about the state window he'd recently seen. What level are you? The guy asked nonchalantly. I'm new, so I'm only 6. You are at a high level. What are you doing here? Kang-woo's level was 3 units lower, but she calls that a high level. Strange, she probably thinks so because of the fact that he easily took down a bunch of goblins and she, with a level 6, was not up to the task. Judging the level by the strength a player has, she could certainly have been wrong. I have my own reasons for being here. I see. Han-sil looked at the evasive Kang-woo and nodded. Although the appearance of high-ranked players at lower levels was rare, she had no right to question a guy who wanted to hide his reason for being here. Can you stand up? Yes, thanks to you, I think I can walk. I'll hold you up. Don't bother. I don't want to cause any more trouble. You don't have to say no if you need help. Gang Yu took the staggering girl under his arm. Hansil tilted her head awkwardly and her face turned red. Where are you going? That way, she said, pointing in the right direction. Embarrassed, of course, she ignored the fact that the high-level boy didn't know where the gate was. Let's go, Kangwoo grabbed the girl tighter and they walked at a leisurely pace. It's a good thing she doesn't ask unnecessary questions. She certainly couldn't know anything about him, but to avoid unpleasant situations, she had to try not to arouse suspicion. Otherwise she'll think I'm crazy. He didn't want to look like a total psycho in front of the first person he'd ever met, and such a beautiful one at that. He had to blend in with the local population. Kangwoo, thinking about his own thoughts, accidentally bumped into Hansil who was walking next to him with a limp. There's the gate, they said as they approached the snow-white gate. It was about 30 meters high. Compared to the black gate from which Gang Yu came, this one was many times larger and more powerful. This is definitely not Earth. If she came here through the gate, that means that the forest with the goblins absolutely does not belong to Earth. Is this place something like hell? The place where one comes through the gate may well be like hell. Where do these gates get their power from? Kangwoo looked at the gates with an admiring look, eyes wide open. They were completely unlike the gates that form in hell, thanks to the power of the 7 great demons. Completely. Kangwoo. Yes. Let's go, Hansil's words snapped him back, and they stepped into the gate. Flowing through one world after another, their bodies moved through the tunnel with unusual ease. Gather a party to E-level, we will hunt goblins. Got a tank? You don't need an outlaw. Sorry, no. When they emerged from the gate, they saw a group of people trying to shout over each other. They looked as if they were in a bazaar. Kangwoo looked at the people assembled at the entrance to the gate and then he felt a tingling sensation in his chest again. People. What he had longed for. People surrounded him on all sides. I really am back, though the earth was different from the one he remembered, but the scenery was still the same. He was clearly aware now that he was back. The remnants of worry were gradually dissolving, and satisfaction and joy were taking its place. It was easier on his soul. Kangwoo. Hansil gently called out to the boy and he turned to face her. If you have some time, why don't you come over for a visit? I would at least like to buy you lunch. She said it in a guilty voice, looking first at Kangwoo's torn clothes and then at her bandaged leg. Certainly offering financial compensation would have been far more appropriate, but she had no such option. However, she didn't want to part with her rescuer simply by saying thank you either. Kangwoo shuddered at the sudden offer. The girl he had just saved was the one who had invited him to visit. In the past 10,000 years, he could only see the girl in his imagination. So when he received the invitation, he was fired up with desire. The excitement was so strong that it was comparable to an invitation to tea. Kangwoo clenched his hands into fists. A strong desire spread through his body. Warmth, his imagination played out. He imagined the two of them raising 3 children in a warm, cozy house, which made a smile play on his face. How warm, his heart, which had grown cold in 10,000 years, filled with warmth again. It would be rude to refuse, so I'll gladly accept your invitation. Kangwoo's eyes sparkled as he nodded. He had no intention of refusing such an offer. Phew, then, follow me. Hansil smiled slightly and turned around. At that moment one of the men at the gate walked in their direction. He was dressed in what looked like military clothing. Player's ID, please. Here you go. Hansil nonchalantly took out an E-level ID card from her pocket at the man's request. Identity confirmed. He checked his identity within a second and nodded positively with a tired expression. For some reason Kangwoo got the impression that the man was a bar employee checking documents. Man, your ID. What a mess. Kangwoo's expression changed. He tensed up. Who knew this could happen? This was a problem. Now he didn't have his player ID. If I say I lost it, it's going to get even more complicated. And if his old ID is found, some problems might surface. Especially considering the fact that he's moved 5 years into the future. Then all his plans for a peaceful return to Earth and a future life could collapse. More importantly, if the situation gets more complicated, he might miss his chance to visit Hansil. What he has waited 10,000 years for could dissolve like sea foam. You can't let that happen. If he misses such an excellent chance, he will be a complete fool. As the saying goes, strike while the iron is hot. Just a second, Kangwoo reached into his pocket with a serious expression. Of course, there was nothing in his pocket. It will be difficult to use force now, but he noticed the man checking Hansil's ID. It didn't take a second to check it. Just a second, it was time to use all the paltry energy he had. Here it is. Gangwoo took his hand out of his pocket and covered his palm slightly with his thumb. With that, the power manifested. The power of illusion. Through it, the consciousness of the person he was talking to should become clouded and he should see what was needed. Using this power required an enormous expenditure of Mij. In addition, the higher the level of the interlocutor, the more power was required, but fortunately, the man who checked the IDs was lower than Hansil. Under the influence of the force, the man in uniform's gaze dimmed for a moment. He looked at Kangwoo's palm and nodded slowly. Identity confirmed. The check lasted for just a second, but all of Kangwoo's accumulated Magi flew out into the tube in an instant. Kangwoo, holding back a heavy breath, lowered his hand. Then we'll go. Yes. They turned away from the inspector and walked toward Hansil's house. Finally, his feet seemed to carry him in the right direction. They say, there is no limit to human greed. At first he thought an ordinary girl with 2 eyes, 1 nose, and a mouth would suffice, but the more time passed, the more he admired Hansil's beauty. Imagining what would happen at her house, he clenched both fists tightly. YOLO! Is this my home? Following Hansil, they walked out to a shabby building. Not only did her house look old, but so did everyone else's in the neighborhood. She doesn't seem to be living very well. The place they came to looked nothing like the attractive high-rises standing in rows that he had expected to see. He looked at Hansol with a look filled with confidence. That's okay, I'll make some money fast and buy us a nice house. He had already imagined their future happy life together. The door opened. Mom, I'm home. Mom. Of course, Kangwoo's clouded mind assumed that she lived alone. Why? His face now expressed extreme discomfort. An exhausted middle-aged woman hurriedly walked out to meet them. Is everything all right? Are you hurt? I'm all right. You were in company, just like I told you to, right? Yes, of course, Hansil said hesitantly as she looked away. Then she looked at Gang Yu and hurriedly continued, this is Gang Yu, we met in the dungeon. Because of the monster attack, there was a dangerous situation, but thanks to Gangwoo, it ended up being safe. Oh, thank you. A middle-aged woman grabbed Gangwoo's hands and thankfully tilted her head. He sensed that the woman was very worried about her daughter, who was traveling now and then. Damn, Kangwoo was listening now, but he couldn't hear the woman's gratitude. So she really did call me for lunch. Kangwoo looked resentfully at Hansil. The future that the boy had managed to draw in his head was blown to smithereens. He was in the mood to climb to the top of the mountain and then just throw himself down. Gang Yu, oh, yeah. I was just thinking, he jerked his head sharply. No one promised him anything, but he felt cheated, and despair washed over him. Our house, it's not very nice, as you can see. But don't worry, the food is great. Hansil looked at the boy's gloomy face and wondered if he was disappointed with their place. Don't worry, that's not why I'm like this. Kangwoo was a lonely orphan before he went to hell and lived in a small room that looked many times worse than her house. Those were the days when even getting food was problematic. But still better than hell. In fact, living on Earth, albeit periodically starving, was far better than living in hell amidst constant battles in which life was the main stake. Come in, Gang Yu. Sorry, our humble abode is not often frequented by guests. The boy was warmly welcomed and invited to enter the house. The size of the house was about 20 pyong. Compared to the exterior, the size was pretty decent. Gang Yu, wait a little while. I'll get everything ready quickly. Is it all right if I ask you a favor? Yes, of course. Hansil became serious and nodded positively. Kangwoo continued in a calm voice. I lost my phone, can I quickly use yours? Yes. She took out her smartphone from her pocket and held it out to Kangwoo. The phone looked very old, and there was a thick crack along the screen. Kangwoo even knew this model of phone. And it's been 5 years. He was once again convinced that the girl's situation was not a good one. But can I scroll through the news on the internet on it? He was going to figure out what had happened to Earth in 5 years. The gate and the players. That's something that absolutely did not happen on the Earth he was used to. Kangwoo found articles from 5 years ago and leisurely began to read them. Abrupt changes on the 22nd of February 2018. Earth changes in an unrecognizable way, disturbances caused by the emergence of large numbers of gates throughout the Earth, monsters call for reinforcements. The army of defenders is brutally murdered, America urgently invites all countries to unite. Korea becomes the 9th country to join the alliance, the first players appeared in America. Who are they? Dramatic increase of players all over the planet. Are they the hope of mankind? Are novels becoming a reality? Players appeared in Korean novels more than a dozen years ago. A large number of novels, on the request of the player, Kang-woo, taking his time looking through the articles, frowned. The 22nd of February 2018 was the day the gates appeared around the world. It was also the day he walked through the Black Gate to Hell. It turns out I just walked into one of the many gates. Come to think of it, that was probably true. Kang-woo searched for information about his gate, but there was no detailed description of the gate in principle on the internet. I'll look again later. If it's about national security, it probably won't be online. When things settle down, he should pay a visit to government agencies. What are you looking so hard for? Han-seol, who was busy cooking, came up to him briefly. I needed to make sure of something, so I flipped through the news. Shall I make dinner later then? No, that's all right. Let's eat. He understood the big picture of what was going on. He was glad that, unlike Hell, here he moved on his own, and was able to find out more information about the changed Earth. It's all ready, just wait a little longer. Han-seol returned from the kitchen with a deep pot. Kimchi. I would have given you a plate, but alas. With a guilty expression on her face, she put the pot on the table and opened the lid. The aroma instantly spread all over the room, making her want to swallow the dish at once. Kang-woo stared at the kimchi. A pleasant feeling overtook him. Kimchi, chig. He kept staring at the pot, or rather at its contents. The broth bubbled seductively, the red kimchi smelled fragrant, and the piece of meat lying on top seduced the boy. Kimchi. Kang-woo had waited so long for this moment that his heart beat faster with excitement. This was something he had dreamed of daily for 10,000 years. He jerked sharply toward the table like some vagabond who had been starving for weeks. It's good to be back. A warm tear rolled down his cheek. The house is just over 20 pyongs. The young man was gorging on the food he had prepared for him with such an appetite that the sound of crunching spread throughout the house. I guess. Are you very hungry? Han-seol looked at the insatiable fellow and smiled awkwardly. You could tell she was a little discouraged by such voraciousness. Kang-woo paid no attention to the girl's ruddy face. He was focused solely on the food. Delicious, he placed a rather thick piece of meat on a spoonful of white rice and dipped it into the soup, then chopsticked a sheet of kimchi on top. Then he opened his mouth and put the spoon in his mouth and swallowed it all at once. Along with this he felt dizzy, his eyes blurred. Damn tasty, he tasted something he hadn't been able to taste in 10,000 years, with every cell of his body. He was as excited as he had been when he first met Han-seol. Oh. Excitement gave way to pleasure. The torment of the last 10,000 years presented itself in his mind as a vast panorama. Damn, it tastes so good, Kang-woo cried like a little child emptying a pot. In fact, he didn't need food. After his body was saturated with magi, he was almost a demon. Demons, because of the movement of magi in their bodies, do not need food. Poor things, Kang-woo, who was now enjoying himself immensely because of his delicious lunch, had sympathy for the demons. Because of the human component left in the guy, even though he didn't need food, he could taste it. To be more precise, demons could also distinguish tastes, but they were distorted and they did not enjoy it at all. Is it that good? Han-seol asked, looking at the sobbing boy who was gorging on kimchi. She was confident in her cooking skills. Because ever since she was little, she often did the household chores on her own. And the kimchi she had just cooked was made by her using several secrets acquired through years of experience. However, the food she cooked was not tasty enough to make anyone cry. Very, very tasty, Kang-woo nodded his head several times in confirmation, emptying the pot. I'm glad you liked it so much, the girl smiled contentedly. Though it was unaccustomed to watching the guy stares over the food, it certainly didn't evoke any negative emotions, especially considering that it was an everyday meal. It was undeniable proof that the kimchi came out excellent. Thank God, she worried about having nothing to offer her savior but food, but looking at his reaction, the guilt began to dissipate. She sensed his kindness and developed even more warm feelings toward the young man. What am I thinking? This was far from a situation in which to think about a relationship. She thought about the conditions in which she was now living and took a deep breath. Kang-woo looked at the emptied pot with a sad look. Little. Even though he didn't need any food, the body that had been empty and motionless for 10,000 years finally came into motion, and all his senses were heightened enough that he was ready to scream. Shall I cook some more? Yes. Har, wait a moment. Kang-woo's eyes lit up and he nodded involuntarily. Han-seol thought this image of the young man was very cute, which made her smile a little and stood up from her seat as she took the completely emptied pot. It's nice to watch a young boy eat with gusto. This is the best kimchi I've ever had in my life. And those weren't just words. The flavor of the dish she prepared was so vivid that it seemed as if a drug had been slipped into it. You can't lose that taste, he wanted, by all means, to keep eating that kimchi jjigae. And how? The answer is simple, by getting married. Of course, the taste seemed even brighter because he had been expecting it for 10,000 years. But now there was no way he could think logically and understand this reason. The moment he stirred the kimchi jjigae, he imagined their future, which made his eyes shine even brighter. I will make you happy. I am the lord of the 9,000 circle of hell, a monster who has devoured tens of thousands of demons. He's the top of the food chain, lost his temper to just one kimchi jjigae. It sounds like a comedy, but it's actually a drama. You're eating with such an appetite that I decided to make more. She brought out a second portion and moved the pot closer to Kang-woo and smiled sweetly. She smiled at him sweetly, because she didn't know him at all. Thank you. He took a spoon and ate the second pot with his cheeks. The spoon rattled and the smacking didn't stop. Really tasty. He first felt a bright taste on the tip of his tongue. And then, just like the last time, emotion overtook his whole body and he continued to gorge himself on the dish. Hansil continued to stare at him with amusement. At that moment, the door rattled open and a young boy entered the room. Hey, Hansil. I heard you went into the gate alone without my permission. Come here. It was a handsome blonde man with short hair, dressed in a pressed suit. He walked toward the girl, scolding. The girl's gaze turned serious. Dae-hyun, who gave you permission to talk to your sister like that? With her brother's appearance, she faintly began to tremble. He grinned his face and stood in front of Hansil. I ask you, who let you go to the gate alone? I am a gambler now, too. And you are the reason I can't find a pack. You're still a yellow-billed man, you don't know anything. A creepy grin creased on Dae-hyun's face. He grabbed the girl by the shoulder. I told you not to screw around and join our guild. Everyone in my clan will treat you well, he whispered in her ear. His eyes sparkled. Hansil stared at her brother in disgust. Taehyun. The sibling was 3 years older than the girl. Garbage like that man can't be called a brother. She clenched her fists tightly and continued to stare at her brother intently. Ever since the gate opened 5 years ago, Daehyun has been a real problem. Even though his father passed away early and his mother was raising 2 children on her own, it wasn't that bad. Because the mother had a good career and was earning decent amounts of money. But in high school, Daehyun was involved in a violent case, after which problems began to arise regularly. It even got to the point of neglecting his mother and blackmailing her. Because of this, his mother got sick and fell ill, after which things got much worse. And, as the saying goes, bad things don't come alone. Daehyun became a gambler. It turned out that he had good skills, so he quickly reached level 10, received a B-rank certificate and joined a guild called Andras. Andras Guild. A guild named after one of King Solomon's 72 demons. As a guild with that name should be, there were a lot of bad rumors about it. Daehyun went out of his way to gain a higher position in his guild. Even though the guild itself wasn't a big guild, it had a significant place among medium-sized guilds. So he wanted a higher rank. Because of that, he needed Hansol. More specifically, her looks. If she would be in the company of the older, there were no girls who could equal Hansil in beauty. If he presented Hansil to the elders, he would surely be able to get a high position. Wanting to make a family member a scapegoat, he felt no remorse at all. I don't want to. There's no way I'm joining your guild. Har, silly. You just don't know how the world works. You think if you always do the right thing, life gets easier? If you come with me to the elders now, it'll make life easier for you and me. How? How can you say that to a family member? Huh, family. That's ridiculous. How can people who look like tramps be family? Who do you think we live like this because of? Daehyun just grinned in response to his sister's cries. Who do you think we're living like this because of? Because of an early dead dad or a good-for-nothing mom? You're such a crazy son of a bitch. Her anger exploded out of her. Hansil clenched her fists even harder and took a swing. He was no longer family to her. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing. No, not even that, he was garbage. Daehyun stopped the fist heading in his direction with a slight movement of his hand. Because he grabbed and squeezed her wrist, the pain spread throughout her body. Now she, a level 6 girl, couldn't compete with a guy who had made it to level 30. Let go. If you have nothing but a pretty face, then think about using it. Your brother's an angel, clean up your bad habits. Daehyun. Go away, woman. He ignored the mother standing in front of him without letting go of the girl's wrist and went into the living room. How about we do it tonight, huh? As he walked from the lobby to the living room, he saw Kangwoo eating kimchi jjigae like an out-of-control person. "Are you messing around with the guys?" Daehyun asked with a sneer and looked at the girl. After letting go of Hanseol's wrist, he looked at Gangyu and said, "Hey there, you're in my way, get off." After letting go of a few more caresses, he motioned toward Kangwoo. But the young man was so focused on his food that he didn't care about Daehyun's indignation. "Bastard, get lost, I said." He lost his temper and swung towards Gangyu, who was ignoring him. But instead of hitting the guy, he flipped the table over. Kimchi jjigae fell on the floor. Lord of the 9,000 Circle of Hell. The monster ruler of hell, bowing down the great demons before him. The greatest of demons, the greatest of devourers, the greatest of rulers. With a voice like the roar of tens of thousands of demons, he shouted, "My kimchi jjigae. What does he think he's doing?" Daehyun looked down at the overturned kimchi jjigae and grinned at the yelling Kangwoo. "Are you crazy? How dare his sister bring some homeless guy into the house? It seems like she's too kind and doesn't have a shred of willpower. Where did you pick up that bum? Ka. Kangwoo, run away!" Hanseol shouted, ignoring her brother's question. Daehyun was between level 30 and the Devourer, weaker, one who digests in the stomach, being at only rank 4. If you don't take the Eater's rank into account, his level wasn't that great, but compared to the girl, he was incredibly strong. Hanseol didn't want to drag her savior into a domestic squabble at all, and she wanted even less to see the guy get hurt. A tempting suggestion flashed through her mind: what if Kangwoo could solve this situation, too? But it was only a passing fantasy, and the girl shook her head. Daehyun made it all the way to B level at the 2nd rank. You usually need to get a 3rd or 4th rank to get to B level. A player's strength is divided by his abilities and level. Therefore, it can be said that compared to other people, he is a more capable player. Kangwoo is in danger. She looked at the young man with concern in her eyes. My kimchi jjigae. Kangwoo sobbed as he looked at the spilled soup on the floor. He couldn't have guessed the girl's worries. Daehyun didn't like such a violent reaction, and his face twisted. "Hey, bum, stop yelling and get up." Kangwoo leisurely turned his head toward the smug Daehyun. Fury was erupting in him. Colliding his gaze with Kangwoo's, Daehyun suddenly took a step back. What the? A person can't possess such a look. It was the look of a ferocious, wild beast. No, his face turned pale. A wild beast. No, the feeling was different. It was a hatred that was pulling him down, choking him. Animals aren't capable of that. His eyes were frightening, maddening. Empty and dark, they were like the deepest abyss. As if, Daehyun found the right word to describe this gaze. He had no doubts. Demon. Demon. He had never personally seen a demon, nor did he know exactly what they looked like. But somehow he was sure that there was no other definition capable of describing the look on Kangwoo's face and the darkness of his eyes. Daehyun took a deep breath and gathered his strength. Suddenly the angry energy that had hovered in the air before evaporated. I must have imagined it. He looked cautiously at Kangwoo. A homeless man can't possess the kind of anger that could frighten him. Daehyun shook his head, trying to throw away the sensations he had just experienced. He didn't want to acknowledge the fact that some homeless man yelling at him over spilled kimchi jjigae could, if only for a moment, scare him. Kangwoo turned to Daehyun, who was looking at him, in a low voice. You. What? You're the one who spilled my kimchi jjigae. Har, you're really out of your mind. Daehyun, dumbfounded by the ridiculousness of what was happening, chuckled involuntarily and concentrated on the force in his fists. When he was at rank 10 level 2, he unlocked his special skill, Hand Flame. Blue flames played on his palms. The fire caused the temperature in the air to rise so high that it seemed that a little more and the whole house would catch fire. Special skill. This is a unique ability that only one player has. It was a power that was supposed to help protect the Earth from the sheer number of monsters that jump out of the gate. Careful. Hanseol hurriedly shouted and held out her hand. A light arrow emerged from her palm and headed for Daehyun's head. Her special skill was light, which was of level D. In fact, her power was more suited to being a snapper than to dealing damage. As soon as Daehyun waved his hand lightly, fire consumed the arrow. The ability, not fully formed, was nothing more than fun for the player. Har! Daehyun grinned and lunged at Kangwoo. The blue flames thickened and headed towards the guy. Ho! Kangwoo jerked his head to the side with a sharp movement and avoided the attack. Suddenly, a black blade appeared from the back of Kangwoo's hand. Kangwoo, concentrating, lowered his head for a second, and then deflected another attack with a slight movement, this time swinging the blade back. Arr! Daehyun shrieked and staggered back. Not so fast, there was a threat from the blade, but the enemy lacked speed. Daehyun, concentrating on the blade, rushed forward. At that moment, Kangwoo struck the enemy's solar plexus with a sharp leg movement. From the start, the blade was nothing more than a distraction. Something capable of capturing Daehyun's attention and distracting him. You bastard! The damage done was not much. Daehyun, continuing to be rude, swung at Kangwoo again. But this time too, without much effort, he successfully dodged and lightly struck Daehyun twice. Kangwoo stepped toward the staggering guy and held out his left hand. Daehyun hurriedly turned on his force, his hands flamed, and he pointed them toward Kangwoo. Kangwoo guessed that his opponent would do that, so he drew back his left hand and struck him in the jaw with his right. After receiving the blow, he collapsed on the living room floor. Daehyun, turning pale, looked up at Kangwoo from below. Most importantly, his stamina and speed levels hadn't decreased. That meant that his opponent was a player with lower levels and skills. But what's wrong with him? The guy was using methods of combat that he had never heard of. Daehyun realized that the sword was a simple illusion, and Kangwoo himself instantly found his weaknesses. Using the blade as a decoy, he moved into hand-to-hand combat. Arr! Taehyun was in so much pain that he wailed, but nevertheless still lunged at Kangwoo. But the outcome was the same. Kangwoo outnumbered him so much that it seemed as if he was fighting a small child. What the hell are you? There was no flaw in his actions. There was a clear advantage in his fighting skills. It felt like he had decades of training and battles behind him. Daehyun, who just a few minutes ago was watching a homeless man weeping as he ate kimchi jjigae, was now weeping himself, but in pain. Ara! Kangwoo's black blade retracted into his hand. It hurts. It hurts. I'm not done yet, Kangwoo said in a cold tone and shook his palm, from which the blade was sticking out a second ago. He broke the boy's arm, and not only a scream but the crunch of bones exploded all over the house. Ara! Daehyun twisted in unbelievable pain. Kangwoo, shaking with anger, looked at his right arm again. The ruler's anger was not enough, just a broken arm. You had almost redeemed yourself. You shouldn't have overturned the kimchi jjigae. Kimchi jjigae. It's only soup. Hey, you're hurting me. Kangwoo looked sternly at Daehyun. What? He heard something that didn't make sense to him. Are you saying it's just soup? Bullshit. Bullshit. You can't apply the term just to kimchi jjigae. It's unthinkable. You are. What? Kimchi jjigae. That's all. Soup. Save me. It was time for more violent measures. Kangwoo kicked the guy's head repeatedly like a soccer ball. Almost immediately, his entire face was covered in blood. Ara! Oh! Daehyun groaned in pain. Compared to Kangwoo, he was superior in every way. Accordingly, he shouldn't have felt this hellish pain. But the pain was getting worse and worse. So, tell me again. What do you think of kimchi jjigae? Oh. Kimchi jjigae is a holy dish. Right, Kangwoo was satisfied with the answer, and he nodded with a smile. He grabbed the trembling boy by the hair and said softly, again. What is kimchi jjigae? A divine dish. Daehyung answered in a frantic voice. Kangwoo wasn't satisfied with that answer, and his expression changed. It's too quiet. Kimchi jjigae is the best thing that could have been invented. You don't put your soul into words. Kimchi jjigae. Wonderful. Dish. Even louder. How believers turn to the Lord God. Like a guy in front of the girl he loves. Put your feelings into it. Kimchi jjigae is the best dish on earth. It was a shout, turning into a shriek. But the Hugh Kangwoo wanted was not there. He bent down and shouted, "Is that loud? No. Raise your voice to the 7th octave. Kimchi." And then, breaking his voice, he coughed. The beastliness was awakening in Kangwoo again. What did you just do? Aren't you going to speak properly? I'm sorry. Let's do it again. Just so it touches your soul. Kimchi jjigae. The best dish. He put all his remaining energy into that shout. Now Kangwoo was satisfied and clapped the guy on the shoulder with a smile. Phew, Daehyun exhaled and sobbed. He had both tears and snot flowing, and soon it all turned into mush on his face. What the crazy?